Hey, good evening or good afternoon on week 2. On Tuesday, I wanted to share some things about chapter 3 with you that I thought were pretty important. Chapter 2 is important when it comes to ethics, but chapter 3 is probably the more important of the two chapters. So what I would like to share with you is that this really defines how you choose a research topic. We start with a problem, and the problem comes from something you're interested in or something that you are have experience with or something you just want to research. And it's not, we lay it out in a linear process, but it's not really a linear process. This is more of an iterative process where oftentimes it circles back and forth with refinement once you decide on your research question and so on. Now, things you might want to look for to be interested in investigating would be an educational theory that you think is all messed up or is great and you just want to verify it. Personal experiences are a big thing. For example, I want to share with you the fact that I taught kids who are reading disabled for 9 years in both Texas and Louisiana schools, and I had a passion of mine for kids who have reading disabilities, and that's where most of my research interests have gone to. A lot of times you use studies that are replicated, and sometimes these need to be replicated for more often. Science is rarely a straightforward process. If you look at what's happened with COVID, you can see that to yourself. 1 minute we think we have all the answers, and the next minute we know that, hey, we took 2 steps forward, but now we have to take a step backward in our refinement. Most problems that you want to investigate absolutely need to be narrowed. You cannot investigate world peace and hunger. Once you decide on a topic, if you want to investigate, for example, take a survey of all the principals in the United States on such a subject, no, you can't do that. You don't have the money or the expertise. You need to narrow it down to a much more narrow scope, and that goes with qualitative research as well. What do we look for in a good problem? Well, first of all, it's interesting. It's researchable. You're not some fly-by-night person. The problem is ethical. You know, if we want to investigate something like, well, does punishment help kids learn? Corporal punishment, well, that would never be acceptable to do something like that in today's society. The problem describes variables. Oftentimes you will form research questions in what effect. For qualitative research problems, oftentimes you're looking at the bigger picture of the whole field. You might say, how does something affect? Like, how does a selection of books affect the motivation to read? That would be a good qualitative research question. Your research question breathes life into everything that you want it to. Everything's dependent on your research question, and from that naturally flows the problem statement. A hypothesis. Hypothesis is not really used in qualitative research, but in quantitative research, it goes something like this. It is hypothesized that such and such a treatment will have such and such an effect, statistically significant effect on this particular group of people. You always want to use it has hypothesized in there and so on. And lots of studies contain more than one hypothesis. Many of you mentioned in your comments this whole notion of mixed methods research. The problem with mixed methods research is it's very difficult to do, to look at both aspects of a research question, both quantitative and qualitative. Usually qualitative research might set up quantitative research to be done later. True experimental research is done usually at the last point, and also for things that are just not experimental research. For example, again, you want to, over the life of a person, you want to see if smoking affects how early they die. Well, you're not going to have a control group that doesn't smoke and an experimental group that smokes and then look at their lifespans and see if it's statistically significant, because we know now that smoking is inherently dangerous and it would not be ethical to do such a thing. So there are all kinds of hypotheses. I invite you to look at your book for further explanation. And also the null hypothesis is in there too. The null hypothesis states that whatever you're hypothesizing, really what you expect to happen had no effect. And believe it or not, quite frequently that happens. And you can have a good research study by affirming the null hypothesis. The book also, in many of the slides, states how to form a hypothesis correctly and so on. This really sets up the rest of the textbook, much like Chapter 1 did. So you have to be very, very familiar with what you're being asked to. The task at the end of Chapter 3 is going to ask you to go through this similar process. And I invite you to read the chapter well, shoot me any questions you have on Ask the Instructor, or contact me directly. I prefer the questions on Ask the Instructor, again, because that's where you get the most information. God bless, have a great week, and I'll be back next week.